I am Doc Askins, the psychedelic science war storyteller, and this is the Anti-Hero's Journey podcast. What's going on, all you anti-heroes out there? Doc Askins coming back at you with another Q5 podcast episode. I've got a special guest on here today with me. Benjamin Greenzweig is a seasoned events veteran, entrepreneur, and the founder of Momentum Events with a deep passion for destigmatizing the conversation on both the diagnosis and treatment of mental health, including especially psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. Ben served as the executive producer of Psychedelic Science 2023, the world's largest psychedelics conference, and Momentum Events proudly played the role of show organizer. Open about his personal wellness journey, Ben passionately believes that everyone has the right to find their mental health balance, and he works tirelessly to create learning and community building opportunities that can open minds and change hearts. Ben, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Doc. It sounds so much better when you read it.
I do my best. I read good. I read good.
You read good.
Yeah, so we're doing this Q5 thing where I ask people 5 of my favorite questions for preparation for ketamine-assisted psychotherapy in my practice. So let's get rolling with question 1. What's your story, Ben?
Yeah, well, listen, million ways to answer that question, but I think for this audience and this theme, I'd like to say that my story is a very common one in many ways. I had battled mental health issues for virtually my entire life. I was diagnosed with PTSD, general anxiety disorder, and major depressive disorder, and it was not a result of any real known traumas. And so this was the diagnosis, and it just left me sort of a very broken human being. I had certainly danced much more than I ever wished my enemies to, with certainly self-harm and worse. And I've had a lot of external factors over the past 10, 15 years that unfortunately were triggers that pushed all these buttons and pushed me pretty down and pretty low and pretty hard. And trying to overcome these challenges, I first tried all the unhealthy habits, like most of us probably do at first, and I tried to drown them in whatever I could drink them. And surprise, surprise, it didn't work. Made it worse. And then I tried talk therapy, and I didn't have a lot of success for a whole bunch of reasons. And then, I'm 45 years old. I grew up in the just say no dare generation. I didn't do any drugs at all as a kid in college. I've never smoked a cigarette in my life. So I was the right person. Drugs are bad. And also, if you have a mental health problem as a man, you keep that to yourself. You don't talk about it. You be strong. Medicine is for the weak. You don't do that. And I believed it. And so, when I talk about self-medication, which didn't work, and I talk about talk therapy, didn't work, I then finally went on some Western medicine, had some mixed results with that as well. But I had a moment where I had just enough clarity, and maybe it was the medicine or the placebo effect or some combination, where I realized that I got to figure this out because I'm not going to get help from anywhere. I'm going to have to find help myself. And I started looking up books, and this is back in 2018. And I stumbled upon Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind, like many others. And I consumed that book, Doc, in 4 days flat. And with each page I read, I was like, wow, that's me. That's me. Wait, oh my gosh, that's kind of how I feel. And so I'm dealing with so many challenges I launched Momentum 10 years ago, and we did not have an easy launch by any way, shape, or form. My business partner who I launched this business with, he died tragically. He had a very rare form of brain cancer back in 2017, so I lost a partner. And then the regular challenges of running a business on top of everything else. So I was getting hit from all sides. And so When I found this book and I just consumed every word of it, I began to believe, hey, this is something that can help me. But going back to that dare generation, I didn't just go do drugs. I spent the next 10 months researching everything I could about psychedelic therapy. I watched TED Talks, I read research papers, um, I read articles, and then I started cold calling all of these industry leaders in the industry, asking them just to talk to me. I called Roland Griffiths. I spoke to Rick Doblin. I called, George and Katya, who used to run Compass Pathways, and JR over in MindMed, and Pete Hendricks, Alabama, and Matt Johnson. And I just started calling them and said, hey, can you just tell me what you're working on here? And listen, I'm a sales guy, so it was liberating to call someone and not sell them something. It's like, oh, I just want to talk. And they were also generous with their time. And then in the tail end of 2018, I spoke to my wife, who was very supportive, and I realized that I had this calling that psychedelic therapy was going to help me. It was going to help me break this horrible cycle I was living in. And so I found an underground guide, and I had my consult in December, and my treatment was scheduled for March 4th, 2020. Uh, yep, just a few days before the world completely shut down. But I did indeed go forward with my treatment, and it was painful. It was uncomfortable. It was unpleasant, but it was extraordinarily cathartic and successful. And I was able to accomplish so much healing and understand what was dragging me down under the surface. And apart from the integration and this new life that I have was gifted, um, I realized that I wanted to dedicate my life to making these medicines safe, affordable, and accessible to anyone who seeks them. And my spiritual gifts were conferences, media, trade show, and events. And so I did what I could to produce conferences and events to bring people together to advance these medicines. And in 2021, we were selected by MAPS to be the organizing partner, and I, the executive producer of Psych Science 23. So calling heard. And we executed obviously this past June. But during that time, I had another MDMA weekend treatment with a different guide and a different set and setting. And it was even more transformational and successful. And so, my backstory, and there's a lot of ways that, this can be answered. Um, it's I was on the outside looking in. I was the no drugs and man up and muscle up and men and entrepreneurs and CEOs and fathers. You don't do this stuff. Suck it up, drink a beer and get over it. And realizing that I deserve to find mental health balance and get myself healed. And so that's a moderate version, a moderate monologue version of my backstory, Doc.
Well, that sounds like a real transformational story to me that could resonate with, millions of American men.
And that's, and I'm sure we'll get there, but in terms of, where this puts my focus and the amount of messages that I get, and I'm very vocal on LinkedIn. I do generally believe that social media is a tool of the devil. And I don't mean that in some fire and brimstone service. I do generally believe that it does more harm than good. It doesn't mean that it's not good, but I limit my comments and my posts to LinkedIn, and I post very publicly about my battles and what I have experienced and where I am and what I do. And the amount of people that have reached out who have had similar challenges and journeys and want to learn more. 85% of the people in this country have never had a psychedelic experience, which means, almost 8.5 out of 10 people either don't know anything or know a little. And these are people, the vast majority of which are caregivers, are trauma survivors, and there needs to be a better way than what we've been doing, because what we've been doing doesn't work very well. And that's evidenced by so many statistics. I know we just came off of a record year for suicides. And you certainly know better than I, the horrifying statistics of, you get, I think it's a plane load of passengers, I believe, die every day of overdose, and the veteran suicide rate. And this doesn't even talk about depression and anxiety, and you move into eating disorders, and we got a lot of problems. And this is a tool that's not for everybody, but this tool works, and that's my passion.
Yeah, you talk about the statistics, and all of those statistics correspond to stories. My family and I went back to Fort Campbell recently to visit some friends, and my daughter's starting her freshman year of high school, and she reconnected with a friend, and my wife was talking to the mom, and they were just sharing notes about the old school that she went to, and there were, I forget the exact number, it was like three or four teenage girls that had committed suicide in the middle school there near Post. And it boggles my mind, like you talked about how social media can be, it's a two-edged sword at best. There are days that I look at it and, reconnect with friends halfway across the planet just as easily as somebody that's down the hallway. And there are other days that I see so much garbage on there that I'd crawl through a mile of broken glass to push the off switch on that thing. It's just kind of all over the place. But you were alluding to, I think, the next question that I was going to ask you. The what's your story question has more to do with memory and where you're coming from and who you are and what you're carrying. And the second question is, what are your intentions? What do you imagine yourself and foresee? What are your hopes and dreams for the future?
Well, it's funny. I think between the two of us, you've had a lot more experience than me crawling through broken glass, so your words probably have a lot more weight. I'm wearing a shirt which I'll stand up here from great company Mental Joe. I know you know them pretty well here. And the shirt says "Bad day, not a bad life." And man, it's such an easy statement, and it's so hard to believe it, especially when you're in the soup and everything looks bleak and tough. And one of the posts I wrote years ago was trying to explain to somebody what it's like to be suicidal, which I was many times. And for people who don't understand it, it's people who go through, who are successful with self-harm. Typically it's they weren't strong enough. And I understand why people say that. Like, I get it, because what else can you say when that happens? But what I try to explain from my own experiences is you get caught in this vicious trap, at least for me. And I think it's a similar pattern, but different stories for other individuals. Those that are combat survivors, those that have experienced, other traumas in their life, as another example. But, you replay things in your mind. And because you can't accept them and release them, you constantly relive these moments in your life that are always the bad decisions. You never look at the good choices you've made, right? And you get stuck in this loop where you would do anything to do things differently because you're in so much pain as a result of those actions. Now, you might not have intended yourself pain, but it could be I turned left instead of turning right, and turning left led me into that building, and that building led me into something, right? The regret is I should have turned right. Oh my God, my life would have been better if I turned right. So you have all these experiences that just play on loop, and then the loop pushes you down because you feel hopeless and you have despair and you feel ashamed and embarrassed. And now the pain starts, and the pain pushes you further down. And then you're like, oh my gosh, I'm in so much pain. Why am I in so much pain? Oh, because I should have turned right instead of left, and you get caught in the cycle. And the only way to stop those thoughts for some is self-harm, because you can't stop those thoughts. And usually those thoughts are, they're not, they are at times not even rooted in the trauma that you're remembering, right? It's connected to traumas that might have happened before that did not provide a good foundation for you to handle those other traumas in your life. I was talking to another veteran who has a nonprofit, Veterans of War, and he was telling me how, he had PTSD and he had his issues. And, for someone who didn't serve, the first question is, what did you see? What can you explain what happened? And he's like, listen, I saw stuff, but this is my childhood that set all of that up, right? And so, you know, so you get caught in a situation where, at least in my case, you almost don't feel worthy to complain about your traumas, because there are people who have seen and been through really bad stuff. And my bad stuff is someone else's awful stuff, and someone else's easy peasy, I did all fine with it stuff. But my purpose, my intentions, and the reason for all that story is I I feel I feel individuals' pain, when they are suffering, because I have suffered for such a long part of my life, and suffering is complicated. It's not easy. You have lived trauma, you have repressed memories, you have inherited trauma, you have nature, you have nurture. And all of our conventional treatments, on average, really don't work. And if people sit here and say, what do you mean they don't work? You just have to look at the mental health diagnosis and the depression and the unhappiness and then the self-harm and nothing has been trending in the right direction for a long time. So what we are doing is not working. So my mission, my intentions is to do whatever I can to lower the barriers for individuals to get access to safe, affordable, and accessible psychedelic assisted therapy. That's not just financial, although that's a part. It's hearts and minds. It's talking to people who question, I'm the dare generation. I can't do drugs, or I'm a practitioner. How do I get into this? So I want to lower all the barriers for people who want and feel that they deserve the need to be healed. So healing is my passion, and those are my intentions.
Yeah, the worst day of your life is the worst day of your life, and the worst day of my life is the worst day of my life. And we wind up carrying those days in very similar ways, regardless of the stories of what events occurred on those days. And I think it's a
So,
beautiful thing that you're looking to try to lower those barriers to people being able to integrate the worst days of their lives and carry them forward in a way that makes them a whole lot lighter and more manageable. It was Sean Ryan did a podcast with Tyler Gray, who was a CAG guy, a Delta guy, and they wind up having two episodes where they talk through a lot of his life story. And there's that trauma bonding that takes place in the
right.
military. It's kind of what drives people into it in the first place, is maybe some of the stuff that was going on in their childhood. There's all of that, shared culture that you can make sense of, and then you have a mission to go on together. And being able to integrate that, those childhood chapters and the, you know, combat chapters or the culture war chapters or whatever it might be for each one of us. Like, I think we can all kind of get side by side on the exact same intentions that you're setting if we, harmonize a little bit ahead of time.
Well, and to that point, Doc, and I didn't mean to try to step on you earlier, but another complexity is you and someone else, you and I could experience the same exact trauma and obviously have completely different reactions and responses. And in many ways, we don't know why, right? And so that makes it even more complicated because if you react one way to a situation and I react the other way to a situation, you're a doc. Both of us are going to present similarly to a treating physician, and we might get prescribed the same course of treatment. But how we got there and how we reacted to it goes so deep into the secrets of the mind and the soul that it's impossible to be necessarily prescribed away. And that just adds to a complexity as a barrier to treatment.
Yeah, I agree completely. So, the third question that I like to ask is around what are you grateful for? And the reason for that is it's sort of a bridge. We talked about your past and we're looking ahead to what, there is in the future and what's going to give you that momentum to get you towards your intentions. Because I
I
think
appreciate the
gratefulness,
cheap
the
nod, so thanks for
superpower there. Yeah,
that.
a little plug for you.
Yeah, thank you for that. When I came through my last treatment, which was MDMA assisted therapy, one of the things I came out of that treatment with was being grateful to all the people that harmed me in my life. And yes, it caught me by surprise as well, because there was a lot of harm done in a lot of ways in my life. And the reason why I was grateful for them is because them pushing me so low and so close to the edge allowed two unbelievable things to happen in my life. Number one, Jesus Christ saved me. I was born and raised Jewish. My mental health and my despair, because I did not have a strong faith foundation. The religion never felt comfortable to me. It was not highly reinforced in my house. moved me into a world of becoming an agnostic, which, as the old joke goes, is an atheist that just wants to be safe. Um, that then led me to becoming an atheist. And when you have all these mental health challenges in your life and you have no faith and foundation to stand on, you so easily succumb. For those that are Christ followers like myself, my feet were not on the rock. I won't even say I was on quicksand. I was on moving particles, is how quickly and easily I fell. And the very first thing that got me on the path to healing was falling so far and almost at the end and being saved by Jesus Christ. And so the gratitude toward those who harm me leads to the gratitude I have to Jesus for saving my life, for God to choose the moments that he chose to awaken me, for God to put my wife and my family and my close friends in my life to just make sure I didn't slip below the surface when things were really rough, to get me through the next day. And then grateful for these medicines that exist, in my opinion, by God's hand, to help others that need more to overcome their struggles. So it's a unconventional gratitude chain, I would say, but it's a healthier way for me to live, and it brings me peace, and it allows me to focus on where I am and not look so much on where I've been. And that's where integration comes in.
Yeah, it's a mind-boggling statement from the perspective of someone who's still struggling and suffering and disintegrated, to hear somebody say, I'm grateful for the people that harmed me and the harm that I've endured. At the same time, it's a theme that I hear over and over again from people in integration work after having done some kind of psychedelic assisted therapy. It's not an uncommon theme that you're experiencing there. It's just that not everybody's listening to these conversations like you and I are having, and because of the barriers that you mentioned earlier, it's harder for people to find out that this is out there, and that hopefully soon it'll be legal, and we'll be able to provide it to all those people who just can't even begin to imagine what it would be like to say the sorts of things that you just said.
Thank you. And the barriers you talk about, we can't minimize how many there are. And that's why it's so important and you play many roles in your service to other humans in every capacity, not just in your service, not just in your practice, not just as a husband, not just as a friend or father or brother, um, and even this podcast and what you're trying to do with your book. And it's an important conversation because the percentage of people who are inside the movement, and I don't mean, I'm not talking about a political movement, the psychedelic movement. It is such a small percentage compared to all of those who are on the outside. And you talk about there's an education gap, there's a cultural gap, there's a religious gap, there's a racial gap, there's a political gap, there's a geographical gap, there's an economic gap. All these gaps exist. But if I could relate it back to what I'm grateful for. So I try very hard to read my Bible every day. I read my devotional every day, and I read my Bible most days. And I'm not being a hypocrite, and being honest. Most days I do. I get through, chapter, few verses. But I really enjoy it, and I have a lot of appreciation for it. Because for many reasons, I'm reading it for the first time. So I'm new still. My transformation happened back in 2014. I was baptized in the summer of 21. So I'm still relatively new to my faith. But this is something that, for those who listen that are struggling to understand how do you get to a position of gratefulness, this is Romans chapter 5. And I took a picture because I highlighted it yesterday morning. I'm in verse 3. And we boast in the hope of the glory of God. Not only so, but we also glory in our suffering, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, and perseverance, character, and character, hope. And hope does put us to shame. Hope does not put us to shame because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through his Holy Spirit who has been given to us. So one of the things that my pastor talks about in my church is there is purpose in suffering. And I could tell you from living and suffering for so long and not having any idea what the purpose was, it's a hard pill to swallow. But the message here is there's a purpose for it. And in the Bible, the suffering brings you closer to God and to Jesus. And if you're not a Christ follower or you're not religious, maybe your purpose of your suffering brings you closer to finding your healing for yourself or a loved one. So yeah, it's a hard concept, and I'd be lying if I told you and your audience that it's easy. And I've been living this way my whole life. But even now, rough day the other day, it might be a rough day tomorrow. Have to figure out what's the point of the suffering. But there's a purpose.
It's beautiful. So, with all your memories and all your intentions and everything that you're grateful for, what are you creating?
I am creating content in the form of trade shows, conferences, events, media that appeal to that 80%, that 85% of people in this country for now that are on the outside looking in. And it's content that has to be created in a way that is not evangelizing. It's important for this movement to not talk about psychedelics as the magical pill or ketamine as the one treatment you'll get and you're great forever. Um, healing is not a destination. It's a journey, and that took me a long time to realize it. You don't get healed, poof, because every day you have different challenges in different areas of your life, and so I want to create education, community building, networking opportunities for the entire ecosystem, right? What does that mean? Yes, your scientists and your clinicians and your entrepreneurs and your investors and your caregivers and your faith-based leaders and your indigenous communities and your veterans and your first responders and your trauma survivors and more the people who I feel have come up with the just say no generation because it's a very large roadblock. And so how do you let someone know that it's okay to have these thoughts? And it's okay to know that there are medicines that exist that might actually help, and you're not going to get holes in your brain like Oprah Winfrey said on 35, 40 years ago, which of course was proven to be a complete and utter lie.
Maybe,
That was
maybe we
portrayed
can
as
maybe we can say perhaps to drugs instead of just no.
perhaps. Well, you know what? Perhaps to drugs. And then how do you consider drugs not drugs? And maybe you consider them like I do medicines, right?
Yeah, drugs is kind of a diminutive term. It's kind of dismissive. I don't like it either. But that was the way we got raised, right? We got to integrate it somehow.
That's exactly right. Drugs, medicines. How do you use these therapies? And as I'm sure you very well know from your own experiences, you know, the actual medicine, the psychedelic or the empathogen, whatever it is you're doing, you know, I try to explain to people again, going back to those who are on the outside looking in, that the psychedelics, if I want to take my truck down to the beach, I need two things for that to happen. I need a truck and I need gasoline. One or the other isn't going to work, right? So in many ways, I explain that in my opinion, the psychedelics are the gasoline. It's what you do after you've been unlocked and freed in the therapy, in the integration. That's where your true healing really comes. So even if you're sitting there thinking, I don't want to take these pills and lose my mind, it doesn't really work like that. I mean, I'm sure there are, we know there's always the point, whatever. I'm not dismissing it. Everything has a risk to it. Important to know your risk profile. But the work is really done afterwards. This just makes it easier on you to get to the work. And if people don't understand what that means, if you're sitting there struggling right now and you've had talk therapy and you feel it has gotten nowhere, That is exactly what I mean. That the psychedelics and the medicines help you make that work actually become more effective. So I think that's the perhaps try drugs.
Amen. So that brings us to our final question, Q5. Who are you really?
Who am I really? Wow. You know, it's funny. I read your questions and I decided to not purposely put a lot of thought into them because I wanted to be organic. I have nothing written, nothing guiding me in any of this. Um, I'm a child of God, just like every single brother and sister on this planet. And I feel best when I help. I know that when I'm having a rough day at work, and there are rough days at work, if I could do something good, if I could have a conversation, if I could make someone's day a little bit easier, show a little kindness, talk to someone like this, that almost erases, if not fully erases, the negativity of the day. So I feel that I am blessed to be here at this time, grateful for the real struggles I've gone through that got me here to talk to others and break down stigmas about admitting and talking about a variety of mental health struggles, but then helping talking about a variety of modalities and treatments and let people know that you don't need to just accept feeling like garbage, feeling worthless, feeling down because nothing else has worked. Because I guarantee there are things that are out there that you have not been able to try or experience. So don't give up hope. It might be a bad day, but it's not a bad life.
Preach. You got any final thoughts for all the anti heroes hanging out there?
The final thoughts are we have, for some time, we have found ourselves in a desensitized world. Authenticity is very hard to come by. The minute the world went digital, everything could be faked. It's just the reality of it. This entire conversation, for anyone who wants to know, could be completely manufactured through AI. Could be.
Every time AI has a fever dream, it dreams of being us.
And then hopefully not enslaving us. But there is a gift for those who share the passion, who have been healed by the medicine or heal with the medicine, to talk very open about their journey because you don't know what level of authenticity is going to resonate with someone listening. You know, there was a long period of my time, and again, I Jesus saved my life in 2014. There was a long period of time people closest to me did not know I was a Christ follower. I was embarrassed. You know, I was raised Jewish and I had this conversion, and did I now become this, this weird outcast? And I had to overcome that because it dovetailed into other issues that I had to deal with. And now I sit here not to evangelize, not to preach, but maybe there's someone listening who has been a Christ follower longer or shorter than me, who has grown up knowing that drugs are bad and for good purposes. Maybe someone they know overdosed. Maybe mom and dad would smoke weed a lot and they would not engage in very legitimate reasons. But maybe this message can get to one person who can open up that door and maybe read Michael Pollan or listen to more of your podcasts or listen over to, George Monty and True Life and others and just like, okay, I don't need to feel this way, or my son doesn't need to feel this way, or my mother or my daughter or my brother. And the more authentic we can be, the better chance you have of hopefully resonating with someone. And I do want to close on my side by saying I'm grateful to you, Doc. And we've gotten to know each other a little bit, and we're going to be doing some fun stuff together in your backyard in the not too distant future. And I don't ever want you to minimize your role in this conversation because I've heard enough of you to know how humble and how you feel and act in this world. And I and others are grateful to you for this forum. And I'm very thankful. And I didn't want to close this out without saying that to you.
Ben Greenzweig, everyone. trying to make me cry at the end of the podcast. Thank you, my friend. Doc out.
Thank you.